Today we're going to build a Notion workout tracker app. We're going to have all our Notion workout data in a Notion table, and then we're going to create a full stack app that is going to read the Notion table using the Notion API and come up with some charts which are going to help us visualize the data better. Currently there is no easy way to draw graphs in Notion, so this app can be a good use if you want to visualize any kind of data from Notion. So I have a demo over here. This is how the end product is going to look like. We're going to have 4 charts with 4 workout data. You can add as many as you can, but just to keep things simple, I have only 4 of them over here. So we're going to have body weight, which is pounds every week. We have the treadmill speed that you're running at every week, the amount you're lifting, and the number of crunches you're doing. So all these are pretty much dummy data, but I think it's going to do a good job to illustrate what you can actually do if you have real data. So the first thing I'm going to show you is on Notion how things are looking. So the first thing is to create to get the API key to talk to Notion, you have to create something called an integration. You can go to notion.so/myintegrations to get to create an integration. I'm going to show you how it looks like over here. There you go. It's pretty simple to create it. Once you create it, it gives you an API key. We're going to use this to actually call the API. This is how our table looks like. So it's a pretty simple table with 4 rows for 4 different kind of metrics we want to track. And every column is going to be the number of weeks. So week 1, week 2, week 3, all the way to week 26. You can keep adding to it. And if you want to keep track of things across years, you can also have columns like week 1 space 2020, week 2 space 2020, all the way to whatever the last year is. So it's pretty flexible, but what I'm going to illustrate should give you a good starting point to get things started. All right, so this is how the table looks like. And one key thing to know is you need something called a database ID. You can get that from the URL. So once you have the database opened, you can go to your browser path, and this is going to be your database ID. We're going to see that in code where you need it and how you can use it. All right, so with that being said, one other thing about the design of the app. It's going to be pretty straightforward. We're going to have a front end, which is going to be coded in React.js. And we're going to use a UI framework called Chakra.js to make things look pretty. On the backend, we're just going to have a simple Python Flask backend that we're going to run locally. And the Flask backend is going to talk to the Notion API to get all the data. The reason you can't directly call the Notion API from the front end is because Notion doesn't let your browser directly hit the API endpoint. It throws an error called the course error, which is like you cannot make requests from across different domains if you're on the browser. So we need to go through our backend endpoint. All right, so with that being said, let's see what we have. All right, so here's the code for the backend. I'm gonna go ahead and remove everything so that we can start from scratch. All right, I'm gonna kill the server. There you go. All right, so the first step is gonna be to get all the packages that we need. So we're gonna get all our Flask related packages. So the first thing is gonna be the course packages to kind of override course restrictions. We're gonna have our response Flask object. We're gonna have Flask, which is our server. We're gonna import JSON to do some parsing, and we're gonna have requests to make API calls. The first thing is going to be to create the Flask app. and then we're gonna wrap it in cores so that all our endpoints can be hit from the client easily. And then the first thing is gonna be the API secret. So I have it over here. So the way you get it is, as I showed you before, you can create a integration and then just get the token from here. It should be pretty straightforward. The next thing is going to be our database ID. I'm going to copy paste the database ID. And the way you get it is in your table, you go to the path, and then you just grab everything from your username to the end. That is your database ID. All right, the next thing we need is the Notion API URL. So that's going to be a F string. We're going to have https api.notion.com version 1 databases. Then we have our database ID. And then we have query. So this is the, I think, the most useful API endpoint that Notion exposes. Using this, you can query any table with whatever filters you want. So essentially, you can do something very, very similar to a SQL query using an endpoint like this. All right, so now that we have the URL, we need the headers that we're gonna send. So the first thing is gonna be the authorization. This is gonna be a bearer token with the Notion secret. And then we're gonna have a Notion version. Notion requires you to send this header, otherwise it's gonna reject the request. That's because the way different versions of the API works, they might be not backward compatible. So if you don't mention the version, they don't know which endpoint you're essentially calling. All right, so that's the setup. Now let's do the route. So we're gonna have the API route. We're gonna call it workout data. It's gonna be get endpoint. There you go. And then we need another decorator, which is gonna be cross origin. This lets you navigate through the course issues. And then we have the function. There you go. All right, so now this is gonna be our endpoint. So all the logic goes over here. Let's have our response data, which is gonna be in a list. All right, so now what we can do is I'm gonna bring you to Postman and show you what the Notion API result looks like. So here we have our endpoint. This is the exact same one we just have in our Python code. It's gonna be a post request. Even though we're getting data, we're not adding any new data. Still, Notion expects your HTTP to be a post method. We have our authorization, which is a bearer token with secret. These are some pretty generic headers we don't care about. You just see the Notion version, which is set to the version. All right, and what we're gonna do is, let me just have the body and then send the request. Okay, so you see the JSON over here. What it does is it gives you an object with results attribute. Results attribute is a list, and in this list, it's a list of objects, and every object is gonna be one row in your database. And in each row, so let's look at the first object, which is the first row. It's gonna be the properties, which are the column values. So properties is gonna be an object where each of the object within that is gonna be all right, let's trace back. I'm gonna show you the table over here. Okay, so this is how the data looks like. We have 4 rows. So in that results array, each object is gonna be each row. And within each of the object, you're gonna have the properties, which are every column. So you're gonna have a name property, a unit, a 1, 2, 3. and each of the property is going to be the key is going to be the column, and then the value is going to be the data in that column. Once we take a look at it, it's going to be more straightforward. All right, so if you take a look at this one, in our first result object, we have properties, and each property is a key value pair, where the key is the name of the column, and the value is the number, the value of that cell. So if you look at 1 over here, it's gonna be this 1, and then we have the content, which is 10, and the plain text, which is 10. So you're getting the data over here, which is crunches. All right, yeah, so that's how the response works from Notion. So once we actually write the code, it's gonna make much more sense. All right, so let's get back to our code. There you go. Let's bring you over here. All right. So we're gonna create our post body, which is gonna be, this is the JSON body, which you're gonna send with your post request. You're going to use the JSON body to specify which rows from this database do you actually need. Because with this request, it's going to return to you all the rows in the database. But what we want in our case is each of the query should only get data for each of the row. So in the post body, we can tell them, give me all the data associated with the row where the name is body weight, and then crunches, and then treadmill speed. This way, every time you get the result is going to be pretty much one object, because we're essentially getting one row, and then within that row, we get access to all the properties, which we can just iterate through. All right, so let's do this. So the way you can filter it is you're going to give a filter object. You're going to give it the name of the property that you're filtering on. In our case, it's name, because if you look at the data, this is the column where we want to filter by. So we want to say only give me body weight, or only give me crunches, or only give me bicep curl. So you have the property name there, and then you have to give the condition, which is going to be in text, if I know how to type. There you go. And you just say text equals, and now let's say you can do something like this. You can say text equals, you can do crunches. So this is only going to give you the row where the name value is crunches, or you can do body weight. This is only going to give you the row with body weight, and if you get the whole row, every column is going to be all your data related to your body weight. All right, so the way we're going to do this is, instead of hard coding it over here, we're going to have our endpoint over here, except what data the front end needs. So let's say if the front end needs plank, it should tell the backend, give me all the data related to planks. If it needs body weight, it should tell the backend, give me only body weight. So the way you can do it is just use a query parameter. So we can just get it from a query parameter. So we can do flask.request.args.get. And then let's say our query parameter is going to be called metric. So essentially, this is how our query is going to look like. We're going to have workout data, and then we're going to have a query parameter metric equals body weight, or metric equals crunches, or metric equals treadmill speed. All right, so it's going to be something like that. All right, so let me just get rid of this. There you go. All right, so this should do that filtering for us. Now let's actually make the request. It's going to be a post request where we're giving it the URL, we're giving it the headers, and we're giving it our Notion post body. We're turning the response into a JSON, getting the results attribute and picking the first object from the array. Let's take a look at this. Remember how this returns you results? That's how we're indexing. Results is a list of all the rows, but in our case, what we're doing is specifying which row we want. So it's either going to be body weight or treadmill speed or crunches. So essentially, our results list is going to have only one object, and that's why you see us indexing into 0, because we're only getting one row and we want that row only. All right, so now let's just do it over here. Okay, so you see we already have that body, the same thing that we had over there in the Python code. Right, so now if you take a look at this, in this is essentially our 0th object, so the only one we care about. We have the properties field, which is an object where each key is the name of the column and value is an object that contains the data within that column, right? So what we could do is we could do all our column data is going to be in that properties, and then within that we can do for column data in all column dot items. So what's happening is, let me just do this. So we're going to properties, which is essentially a dictionary once we turn it into a Python object. So we're saying go to that dictionary, iterate through that dictionary. So dot items gives you a tuple where the first element is the key and the second element is the value. So over here you can see this is gonna be your first element of the dictionary. I'll just zoom in. Can I zoom in? Nope. Yeah. All right, so this is going to be our first element. When you do dot items, the key, which is 1, becomes the first element of the tuple, and the whole value, which is the dictionary over here, is going to be the second value of the tuple. So that's why you see us writing column, because your key is going to be the name of the column, and data is going to be the value associated with that column. All right, so with that being said, what we could do is we could say if column in name, so if the column is name, we don't really care, so we'll just continue because we already know which. Because what we're essentially doing is we're going to make separate API calls for body weight, treadmill speed, bicep curl, and crunches. So every time we make the call, we already know what the name is, so we don't really care about this whole column. And then let's do continue, and then within our response data array, we're going to append an object, which is going to be the week, which is our column, and then the metric, which is gonna be the value in that column. So in our case, let's see the Postman response, it's gonna be in rich text, which is an array of 1 item. So we're gonna do rich text, index into the first element, which is gonna give us this. Within that, we're gonna go to text, and then we're going to get the content. So you see that's 10 over here. That's what we want. So we could do data and then rich text. We get the first element. We go to text and then we go to content. So this should give us the value in that cell. So this should give us, like in case of crunches, which you're seeing over here, the first one is 10. Week 2, it's still 10. 10, and then week 3 is 10, week 4 is 15. Let's see. Week 3 is 10, week 4 is 15, all the way to week 26, it's going to be 45. So if we go down, week 26, it's 45. All right, so let's go back to the code. All right, so we're going to have a list, and the list is going to be objects. Each object is going to have the week and the corresponding data within that week, and it's going to be in the metric field. All right, and once we compile that whole thing, what we could do is, so once we have that, what we could do is just actually give it as a response. So we could do app.response class. We give it a response, which needs to be in JSON. So we want to do json.dumps our response data. And then we default to string in case any of the encoding fails. And then we have our status code, which is going to be 200. And then we're going to give it a MIME type of application JSON. And then we just return the response. All right, so let's see, what do we have? We're gonna run it. Now we need to go into the virtual environment and then run it. All right, okay, we are not running our app, so let's just run our app.run. This is running our Flask app. All right, there you go. So it's running in 5000 port, and we have our workout data get endpoint. So I have it over here. So we have 127.001.5000 workout data, and then we have the metric, which is set to blank right now. Right, so we don't need this over here. So we don't have plank in our table, so let's look at our table. So we have body weight, treadmill speed, bicep curl, and crunches. So let's do crunches. Make the call. There you go. So we're getting an array, and we have week 1 10, week 2 10, week 3 10, all the way down to week 26. And then we have the units. Remember, we have another column over here, units. This always ends up at the end because we are essentially doing 1 2 3 4 5 6. It's sorted, and then you have units. All right, so let's do another. Let's do body weight. So we have 175, 3, 8, or 0, 8, 0, 72, all the way down to 138. Very, very similar. So we have the backend working. Now let's move to the front end code, which is going to be in React.js. So for the front end, we are gonna have, what I'm gonna do is, give me 1 second. Let me just get the code. There you go. We can just do it over here. And then we're gonna do this over here. All right. So this is our React front end. I'm gonna go ahead and delete everything and turn this off. So we're gonna delete everything. There you go. Let me just run you through the directory structure. So we have public and source and package.json. Public is pretty generic. We have index and manifest. In source, we have app.js, which is going to be our top level component. We have index.js, which is pretty much just getting the app component. And then we have the 2 CSS files, but we won't really be using CSS because we're going to be using Chakra UI for the UI components. All right, so the first thing is going to be to, let me just start the front-end server so that we have something to look at. So we're just going to do npm start. This is going to start it up. It's going to load. This is what we had before. And now it gives an error because we don't have an app component. All right, so let's start by defining our app component. And then we can return hello world. We're not exporting it, I believe. Yeah, we're not exporting it. So we just do export default app. All right, so we're starting with hello world. So we know that we're starting from scratch. So the first thing is going to be to import the packages. I already have them downloaded, so you'll need to go ahead and do a npm install on the packages. So the first package is going to be the first thing is just a basic CSS file. All right, so the first thing is going to be Chakra UI, which contains all our React components. So we need Chakra provider to set it up. Oops, if I can spell. Chakra provider, there you go. We need a center component, which is pretty essentially a div which is centered in your page. We don't really need container. We need the simple grid component, which is a grid view. We have a heading. We have a VStack, which is essentially a flex box where everything is vertically stacked. That should be it for us. And this is gonna come from Chakra UI React. And then we're gonna use a package called recharts to render all the graphs and charts. So we're gonna get the line chart. We're gonna get the line. We're gonna get we need the grid. We need the x-axis. You're gonna see how all of them go together when we draw our first chart. We want a tooltip, and then we have the label, and all these are gonna come from recharts. There you go. All right, and of course we need our basic React function. So we want state, and we have use effect. So we have the toHook, and we get it from React. All right, now that we have this, what we're gonna do is actually get the data. So first we need all the state. So we need our weight data, which is gonna be one of our state. And initially it's gonna be an empty array. And then we're gonna have our treadmill data. And initially this is also gonna be an empty array. We're gonna have our biceps data. This is gonna be an array again. So initially all these are gonna be empty because we don't have the data yet. And lastly, we're gonna have our crunches data. And that's gonna be, surprise, surprise, an empty array. All right, so these are gonna be all the state we care about. And now we need to make the API call. And the only time we make the API call is the moment the page renders. So every time we go to the website, we should make a call to get all the data. So the best way to do it would be to put it in the use effect hook. And then within that, what we could have is, right, so we have it over here, and then we do it only once. All right. And now we're just gonna hit our fetch requests, and the fetch request is gonna go to HTTP 127.0.0.1 5000. We have our workout data endpoint, and let's say the first one we want is the metric is gonna be body weight. And then we are gonna get its method is gonna be a get. And then we need our headers, which is gonna be our content type, which is gonna be application JSON. Right, so that's gonna be our first fetch. And once we get the data, we're gonna turn it into the response. get the JSON. So these are pretty much boilerplate for every fetch request. So you should be pretty familiar with it at this point. And then we want to get to the data. Right. So the data, and then once we get the data, there's only one thing so the first, of course, we have to set our state. So set waits data to the data. But one other thing we have to do is, let's see. So let's just do JavaScript array shift. And the length of the array. All right, so we're doing the dot shift, right? And why are we? So let me just make sure that this part is clear. I don't think we need to do that. Let's see, so if I look at our endpoint, what is it doing? This is what it's returning, right? Yeah, so I don't think we need that really. So we could just, all right, so right over here I have a function called data.shift. So let's not do that. Okay, yeah, forget about that. So we have our function over here. So what this does is pretty much makes the fetch call and sets the data. So we want to do the exact same thing for each of these. So I'm going to copy paste this fetch. 2, 3, 4. For 4 data, we have 4 of them. So we have our body weight. The next one's going to be our treadmill speed. And this is going to be our set treadmill data. Then we're going to have our bicep curl. And this is going to be set biceps data. And finally, we have our crunches, which is going to be our set crunches data. All right, so all 4 states are being set right now. And now comes the part of rendering these data. So the first thing is, if the data is not being rendered, we could just do if not weight data, or not treadmill data, or not biceps data, or not crunches data. So when any of the data is not available, we're just going to return null. So this makes sure our charts don't render, don't bug out when rendering, because if the chart is trying to render and the data is not there, it's going to throw an error. So we want to make sure we don't do that. All right, so let's just see if everything's working. All right, things look cool. Let's look at the network tab. Gonna refresh. All right, so see, we're making 4 requests and each of them are giving us all the data. So we know that the data is coming from the backend correctly. All right, so now let's actually render all our charts. So the first thing we want to do is get rid of this. So to set up Chakra, all you need to do is have a Chakra provider, which is going to be top level. Now, the first thing is we want to center everything. There you go. We want to give it a class name of app. And we're going to give it a background. I'm just going to copy paste the hex code. There you go. And then we're going to give some bottom padding. The Chakra lets you do this very easily. There you go. So we have the color, it looks pretty, and everything should be centered. And so what essentially it does is whatever you put inside, so let's say you put hello world, this is going to be centered. There you go. So this helps you not write a bunch of CSS to center things. All right, so now that we are saying all the content should be centered, the first thing we need is a heading. And the heading, let's say the first one we're going to show is the body weight. We have the body weight. All right, but before that, what we need is our outer page headline, which is going to be our Notion work. workout tracker. Let's give it a size of, let's say, 4XL. All right, let's see. There you go. So we have our Notion workout tracker. So remember, the demo I showed you at first, we had our title and then we had all our 4 charts below it, right? So essentially it's one on top of the other. So we could have something called a V stack, which is vertical stacking. And then V stack. And within the vertical stack, the first is gonna be the heading. And after the heading, we're gonna have those 4 charts in a grid structure. So we need the simple grid component. We're gonna give it 2 columns because we have a 2 by 2 grid. And the spacing is gonna be, let's say, 10. So now if we do this over here, we're gonna have, what's that called? Heading. Right, and the heading is gonna be body weight, let's say. So we have body weight over here. If we had another heading, let's say body weight, and what did we have after that? We had treadmill speed. So see, it's going to the right. And then we have 2 more. So we have bicep curls, and then we have crunches. So there you go. So we have a 2 by 2 grid. All right. So we don't only want the heading, of course. We also need the charts. So this is just to show you how that would work. All right. So in the grid, which is 2 by 2. Every element is gonna be the title and then the graph. So within that, it's a vertical stacking, right? So we have the title and then the graph. So essentially something like this, right? So if we have a V stack over here, and then let's have within the V stack, let's have our heading. And let's say we have, here is my chart, right? And then let's copy this for 4 of them. So 2, 3, 4. So now, if each of them were a different one, so we have treadmill speed, and then we have bicep curls, and lastly, we have crunches. Alright, there you go. There you go, see? So we have a 2 by 2 grid. Every element of the grid is a vertical stack where the first on top element is the title, and then it's gonna be the chart. So now let's actually see how we wanna do the chart. So I'm gonna get rid of this. We're gonna have a line chart. We're gonna give it a width of 860. You can play around with this numbers, but I know already what looks pretty, so I'm putting them right here. And then you give it the data, which in our case is gonna be weight data. Right, and then we close it. Within the line chart, we can customize the line. So we give it the line component. We can give it a type. In our case, it's gonna be, so you have multiple types, we're just gonna choose a monotone one. And then we have the data key. So this is, what this does is it says within the data I'm passing you, which is the weight data, which is gonna be your y-axis, because y-axis is where your data is gonna be, and x-axis is gonna be the label. So your y-axis is gonna be the metric key, because remember, if you look at this, we had the week and the metric. So we're passing it the array, and your line chart component knows that in an array, every item is one data point. So within that data point, it needs to know which is the X value and which is the Y value. So we're telling it that metric is going to be your Y value. And then we have the stroke of the line, which in our case, I think we can just put the hex code from over here. There you go. So this is the line, and then we can do the x-axis. So similarly for x-axis, you tell it what is the key, and the key is going to be the weak attribute in our case. And then within the x-axis, we want to label it. So to label it, we can just say value. It's gonna be weak. This is gonna be the label we write at the bottom. Offset is gonna be 0 because we're starting from 0, and position of the label is gonna be inside bottom. All right, that's our x-axis, and now the y-axis. So the y-axis is gonna be, you're gonna give it a domain. So this means the starting value to end value. So our y-axis should start from around 140, because we know that the last value right now is like 130, and maximum is gonna be auto. So depending on what the maximum, it's gonna like fit the chart accordingly. So that's our domain, and then we want to give it the label. And the label is gonna be an object where the value is gonna be pounds. The position is gonna be inside left. And given it's the y-axis, we want to turn the label 90 degrees so that it looks nice. So we're gonna give it a angle of -90. All right, so that's how our y-axis looks like. And then we want to give it a tooltip. So for the tooltip, we could literally just do tooltip. Let's see what we have. All right, so we have our body weight, which is chart 120 to 180. We're going pounds. This is why we had to move it 90 degrees, because otherwise this label would be horizontal. And we have units over here. That's because that's the label we're putting, right? All right. So what else do we have? Tooltip, line chart. Oh, and the tooltip is if you're hovering, you can see like there's a tooltip giving you both the X and the Y value. One thing is, are we missing something? I don't think so. All right, so there you go. We have it like this. I think we're missing the label of the x-axis. Why doesn't, right. So the x-axis, it's the value. There you go. And you see the week over here now. So we have pounds, weeks, both the axes are labeled. You have a tooltip and you have a sleek looking chart. We're gonna do the exact same thing for the other ones. So it's gonna be just a bunch of copy pasting to have them rendered correctly. So we have our treadmill speed, which is going to be essentially this line chart. All right, and then we're just gonna, all right, so the data is going to be the treadmill data. Data key is still going to be week. The y-axis, which is the units, is going to be, this is the treadmill data, so it's going to be speed, I think. Let's look at our table. Units, it's miles per hour, so it's just going to be mph. All right, and then we're going to have the other one, which is our bicep curls. We're going to have biceps data. And then this is still going to be pounds. And lastly, we have our crunch data. And now let's just have our data set to crunches data. And this is just gonna be, what's the unit? Reps. There you go. right, so we're gonna save it, and there you go. So we have body weight, treadmill speed, bicep curls, and crunches. All four are in a simple grid, which is 2 by 2, so everything is like everything has enough space. All of them has the tooltip, so you can just hover around and see what the values actually are. So let's do one thing. Let's add like a new value to our database table and see if it shows up in the chart over here. So if we go to our data, so let's just change our body weight from 175. We're going to start from 300. And then refresh. See? So now we're starting from 300, whereas previously we were starting from 180. Let's say we are starting from 120. I'm going to refresh. So say previously we were starting from 300, now we're starting from 120. Right, and lastly, let's add a new column over here. Let's call it week 27. And let's go back all the way, right? So let's do 190, and let's say this is gonna be like 15. From 40 at the end, let's say we're gonna jump to 80. And then from 45 at the end, let's say we're gonna jump to 90. So take a look at everything. All of them are pretty much, so let's say the body weight is going at the end to 138 pounds. Treadmill speed is going to 9. If I refresh, all right, there you go. It takes a bit to render it, but yeah, at the end you can see weight goes all the way to 190, and this is even having a hard time to render. What's the treadmill speed? Let's see. Treadmill speed. Let's just not go all that far. So let's just do 12.0. Refresh. 9 and then 12.0. Yeah, so you can see it increasing. There's a weird rendering issue over here. I think that has to do with scale, but I hope you get the point. And bicep curls, similarly, you can see it going all the way to the top, and so for crunches. So yeah, as you add more and more data in your Notion table, the graphs should automatically be updated, so you can use this as a very good visualization. So maybe throughout the week you just put the data on Notion, and then at the end when you want a zoomed out look of how you did, or at the end of the year you want to see what the trending lines are, you can just spin up the dashboard and look at the data. So to summarize, what we have is we had our front end in React, and we're using recharts for charting and Chakra UI for the UI components. And then we have our backend. Let me see if the code is still here for the backend. No, it's not. So we have our backend, which we built together, and the backend was in Flask, Python, and we have both of them running locally and talking to each other. And we also kind of took a look at how the Notion API works. I have another tutorial coming soon where we're going to see how individual operations in a Notion database work. But this should give you an idea of how we can use the API and apply it for some helpful application using our Notion data. So with that being said, I'll leave you all here, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Bye-bye.